Hi, welcome back. We had a look at ngIf, ngFor and ngSwitch. And to be honest, I think those three directives cover most of the use cases you have in your application. But if you need something else and you want to create your own structural directive, well, you can do that. And we're going to do this in this video. Now we're going to create a relatively simple structural directive, which will be just the opposite of the ngIf directive. We'll call it unless directive, which basically means, well, ngIf checks if something is true, we will check if something is false. Now, while this is pretty simple, it will show you how to create such a structural directive, and you could create more complex ones with that knowledge. Let's dive into this. First, here on my directive document, so to say, I'm going to create a new section called directive, again, just for the styling. And in here, I want to have my custom directive, which will be my unless. I want to let the user enter true or false into this input field here, which I will assign a local variable named condition to, and again create my dummy event. Okay, and then here I'll have a div element where I will later attach my custom directive to, and which then should only be shown if false was entered. Okay, let's create that directive. Like before with the attribute directive, I'm creating a new file here, which I will call unless directive.ts. .ts is the name of the file. And then here, well, first I will again import directive from Angular to core. And I will add my directive decorator here with the JavaScript object as an argument. And I will export the class called unlessDirective. And now what I want to do is I will create a selector, and the selector will be my unless. Now that does not mean that we're using squared brackets my unless to attach it to an element, but we will have to use star my unless without any brackets, just like before with the attribute directive, where we also didn't use the brackets. That's just how we set up the name of our directive or of our selector. So now what do we want to do in this directive? We want to somehow get a reference to the content here inside the element this directive is attached to, and manipulate in a certain way. That is what we want to do. Therefore, inside of our structural directive, we need to inject two things. One is a way to create a template which should be inserted if the condition or whatever we're doing in the structural directive is met. So if we want to alter it or change something in the DOM, we need to do this through a template. Therefore, we need a reference to a template, which we'll get, and I will bind it to a private property called template ref by injecting template ref here. This object will hold such a reference, and this template will automatically be the code between the opening and closing tag of the element we're attaching our structural directive to. So I will be attaching it to this div element, so everything inside this div element will be the template to which this template reference is referring to, or to which it holds the reference. The next thing we need is the view container where we want to render it to. So basically the place where the element we're attaching our directive to currently sits. We're getting this reference and we're also binding it directly to our view container ref by injecting this view container ref object here. So now we got the two objects, template ref, the text between the element tags where we're applying our directive to, and view container ref, the place where we want to then insert it into our DOM, into our document. So with these two things available, all we have to do is get the condition, which we will be specifying just like here with the normal ngIf directive between quotation marks. Somehow get that condition, evaluate it, and then either displaying the content or not. To do this, we need an input, right? So let's add our inputs metadata here, and I will just call it my unless. So this is the name of my directive, and I want to be able to directly bind to it. The same reasoning as with the attribute directive. I could choose another name here or use an alias, but if I were to use another name, I would have to attach the directive with a star and then additionally attach my different inputs. But in this case, I can all do it in one step, so to say. So I'm creating this input, my unless, and here I'm also creating my unless property, but this will only have a setter. Now this set function here basically means that, well, we specify what happens when this input gets set. So we're not interested in getting anything, we're just interested in setting it, and with this set keyword we can then directly execute a function. So this will be condition, and this is a boolean. So this condition will be whatever we enter between the quotation marks in our HTML code. So for example, this here will be the condition which is passed to this property, which is only settable and which on set will automatically execute the logic we're defining here. And what we want to do is here check if the condition is false, and if it is false, well, then we want to render something because we have unless, so the opposite of the ngIf. We're doing something when something is false and not true. So in this case, we want to access our view container and tell him to create an embedded view which should hold our template. So let me zoom in a bit. It should hold whatever we enter here. So in this case, only shown if false. This is our template, and this should then be created and shown. Otherwise, if our condition is true, we don't want to display anything, and then we will just tell him to clear the container to make sure that our document is empty and nothing is shown. So now I can attach it here by writing my unless with a star at the beginning because it is a structural directive, my unless, and then condition is the name, the local variable of my input field here. So condition.value is whatever the user entered, and he should enter false to display something. So here we're checking if he didn't enter false. So unless he didn't enter false, display it. Or put in other words, only display it if he entered false. So you have to kind of think around the corner here, but it's really just the opposite of an ngIf check. Now for this to work, we obviously need to import our directive here. So we add the directives metadata to our component decorator. And here we want to add our our unless directive. Let me save this. And now you can see, we see something here, and if we enter true, nothing happens, but if we enter false, only shown a false was entered. So our custom directive is now working, and this is how we create structural directives. Now, as I said at the beginning, I'm pretty sure the built-in directives provide you with everything you need probably, but in the case you want to add your own structural directives or you have your cases where you need them, this is how you create structural directives and how you can alter the DOM with them. So in the final project in this section, we're going to use structural directives or directives in general to build our first little bit bigger application, a complete to-do list. See you there. Bye.